I didn't make this video at the time because events were moving very rapidly, and sometimes I cover things as they're happening, but perhaps it's useful to wait a few days for the dust to settle. And on some level, that's what's happened in South Korea. Dust has settled. The worst case scenario is over. However, it is definitely a reminder of the fragility of democracy. So a few days ago, if you don't, if you're not aware of this, the president of South Korea declared martial law, and it's the first time that's been declared in that country in 45 years. The last time was after the assassination of Park Chung-hee in 1979. Um, this on this occasion, the president's reasoning for doing so was supposedly information that claims have had about communist takeover, far left elements, etc. I think the general reading of this is that it was President Yoon pushing back against what he saw as political difficulties that he's facing, and I think it's widely seen as an abuse of power. I think a lot of South Koreans are furious with Yoon over this, and they may be just as angry now that his own party, despite criticising his move, have propped him up to stay in power. So he hasn't resigned, and I think that might cause anger. I wouldn't be surprised if we see large protests in Seoul and Busan and other big cities over this. But the good thing is the immediate situation seems to have calmed down. Um, only hours after declaring it, Yoon had to step back and call off this martial law rule. This is the coverage in the London Times. So they had it as a main international story in this edition, December the 4th. I'm not going to read out everything because it's quite extensive coverage on this, but I totally understand. Well, not that this country has a similar history, but I can understand why South Koreans would have been very concerned and angry about this, and also why it would have caused jitters in Washington and Tokyo and other allies of South Korea. Um, the actual evidence, I think, for far left elements is probably minimal. You'll probably have some sympathizers. I mean, South Korea is about 50 million people. You're going to have some far left elements, but not enough to justify what he done. I think it was basically a political stunt to deflect from internal problems he's having, parliamentary problems he's having. He's something of a colourful character, President Yoon. He's very conservative. He's known for engaging in the culture wars and for sort of galvanizing the anti-feminist movement in South Korea. I'm not going to say whether I agree with that or not because I don't know enough about the Korean context to say so. I have been critical of Western feminism, um, and it appears that young men in South Korea feel stigmatized. So there is something of a men's rights movement in that country. But like I said, I don't know enough about it to really say whether I agree with the president's position on that or not. Um, he does want to abolish the Ministry of Equality, despite plentiful evidence, and I'm quoting Richard Lloyd Parry here, of inequality of opportunity, representation, and income for women in South Korea. But there's a few things to consider before we look at this. South Korea is one of the strongest economies, one of the strongest democracies in the Asia Pacific region. I believe it ranks about 12th biggest economy in the world. It's a developed country. It's a world leader, as we know, in digital technology. Um, in the last sort of 15 years, its cultural exports have been enormous. K-pop, um, Gangnam Style, PSY, I should say, Squid Games, Korean culture is not only appreciated in the Far East, it's also increasingly appreciated in the West as well. Um, so South Korea has come from being a poor country to a wealthy country to a stable democracy. It's largely a story of success. So for President Yoon to take this move would have sent alarm bells throughout the country. Um, Whether he's going to be impeached or even face jail. I think it's unlikely that he'll face jail, but certainly it will damage his party. The fact that they've propped him up. I understand that Korean presidents have a 5 year term limit, so he can't run again, but I think it will damage his party. I wouldn't be surprised if they lose the next presidential election as a result of propping him up. And if you look at the images here, quite dramatic images. This is lawmakers literally blocking soldiers from Parliament. I mean, the events of that night were bloodless. There's no deaths. That's in contrast to the events of 1980, the Gwangju uprising massacre, in which hundreds, possibly thousands, were killed. It's a very painful memory for South Koreans, because although South Korea is a functioning democracy today, right up until the 80s, it was a dictatorship. Um, Today, of course, the North is, well, everyone knows what the North is, but I think this was a case of Yoon sort of using that as an excuse to save himself politically, and it's backfired. Um, both parties in South Korea, the Democratic Party and his People's Power Party, understand the importance of relations with America. America has big military bases in South Korea. Um, but the good news is that there's been, the president has seen how unpopular this move was. And it looked like he had pretty much no support or very little support. His own party criticised him, although they've propped him up now, but they did initially criticise him. I'm just going to quote this. Um, let's see. I want to get the right person I'm quoting. Yeah, this is an abuse of power and a violation of the constitutional order because the declaration of martial law should meet very demanding conditions, warlike situation, civil war, or complete loss of public order. Bong Young Shik, a professor of politics at Yonsei University, said none of these elements exist. He added that Yoon may now be impeached. Well, that hasn't happened. But yeah, I mean, if the North suddenly attacked the South, that might be a situation where the president would understandably have those sort of powers, something akin to what Zelensky had with the invasion of Ukraine. But that isn't the situation. And most young South Koreans see the North as alien. So the idea that there's kind of extensive communist infiltration in the South, I think, is minimal. Here's a picture of the president. Apparently, he's a dog lover, so that's perhaps in contrast to his conservative image. I don't know that he's big into animal welfare. In January, a law was passed banning the slaughter and sale of dogs for the meat, which will come into force in 2027. His wife's also a controversial figure, Kim Kyun Hee. She's receded from view after she was accused of improperly accepting an expensive Dior handbag. They remind me a little bit of the Marcoses in the Philippines, Ferdinand and Imelda. Now, Yoon isn't technically a dictator; he was democratically elected, but his wife reminds me a little bit of Imelda Marcos. She's good looking. She's obviously values materialism, so there's some similarities there. Here's a picture of them um, with the dogs. South Korea and Britain have very strong ties. British soldiers died for the liberation of that country, and last year's state visit, I think, went very well. Obviously, this is an internal matter for South Korean politicians and people to decide, but I think it does show how fragile democracy is. I think it was a cynical power grab by President Yoon. I think it will absolutely stay in his record. No matter what he does the next 3 years, no matter what positive legislation he brings in, people will always remember this, and they will always remember this is the guy who tried to bring us back. This is the guy who tried to bring us back to the old days of dictatorship, and he failed. So Yoon has shot himself in the foot with this, um, and I think it just shows the fragility of democracy. The good news is it never transpired. There was no justification for that. It would have seriously taken away the civil liberties of South Koreans, but it didn't. It didn't work. Um, So I don't know what's going to happen next. So probably be some protests in Seoul over the fact that he has been propped up by his party. I think there'll be very real anger against the People's Power Party for propping Yoon up. I mean, they'd initially criticised him. I'll just get this quote. Where are we? His own party. Da, da, da. Um, the speaker, this is not about his party, but anyway, the speaker, Wu Won-shik, said that 190 of the Assembly's 300 MPs were present. This was an emergency vote, um, and they voted to end martial law unanimously. The declaration was therefore invalid. He said that is the president's declaration. So this was basically the president against parliament, and the parliament won. That shows the importance of a democratic institution. This wouldn't happen in China or North Korea, certainly, um, where the presidents have absolute power. This is the power of democracy. This is the importance of democracy. Without institutions like a parliamentary system that's accountable to the people, how would I mean if those parliamentarians had no power, you would have just got away with this, and that would have seriously rolled back the civil liberties of South Koreans. So the positive thing is this did not succeed, but it was a reminder of the fragility of democracy. If you're Korean, please feel free to tell me what the feelings are on the street at the moment. I mean, it may be that some people supported President Yoon. It may be that some people do feel there was far left elements, um, but I think there's minimal evidence for it. Of course, in a country of 50 million people, you're going to get some people who will go further than wanting positive or let's say improved relations with the North to the point of actually being sympathetic to the North. Of course, you will. Just like in Britain, we have some Putin sympathizers. So you're going to get that in any democracy. In Japan, there's some far left element who want to cut off all links with the United States, but they're a minority. Same in South Korea, and the same in Britain. So yeah, dramatic events and so on. And it's just that, when that breaking news happened, a lot of people, including myself, were shocked because South Korea is a pretty stable country. It's a strong economy. Often these sort of things happen in countries where there is economic stagnation, where there is already internal strife on the streets. That isn't the case in South Korea. So there's absolutely no need for this. Um, but it also shows, in Britain we cannot be too complacent. I don't think this would happen in the UK, where a parliamentary system is opposed to a republican system. But nevertheless, we can never be complacent about the institutions of democracy. Now, I think people can be free to criticise institutions. I think there's very strong arguments for reforming institutions. I strongly argue, for example, for reforming our legal institutions. I think they need to be far, far, far more in touch with public opinion. Um, but I do support institutions in terms of the principle that they provide. Um, what else could be said? In Britain, we need to be very, very wary around free speech. That is one area that I don't agree with those who say Britain's a police state. I think that's hyperbole. I also think it's hyperbole to say there's no free speech in Britain. That's nonsense. Clearly, I'm making these videos. I can say pretty much what I like. I could criticise Starmer. I can criticise the King. I can pretty much say what I like in that regard. However, the use of non-crime hate incidents in this country is deeply alarming. And some South Koreans might say, well, you're talking about the situation here, but what about that? And they would have a point. I am very, very concerned about the use of non-crime hate incidents. Um, and I do think they should be pushed back against them. I do think they should be pushed back against how hate crime legislation is used. The absolute priority for the police has to be crimes against the person, violent crimes, burglaries, the sort of crimes that really, really concern people. As I've said before, there may be some legitimacy in the police gathering data of hate groups, for example, or people constantly spewing out bile against a particular group. That may be, there may be ground for looking at data there in order to prevent community tensions. But I think the police do themselves no favours when they turn up to someone's home to investigate a non-crime hate incident. Non-crime, that is the point. Um, we have to be absolutely free in this country to forcefully condemn and scrutinize Islamist ideology, which is an absolute threat to Western democracy. Anyway, that's how I feel about the UK situation. if you're in Korea, if you're a Korean, if you're there, let me know what's the situation. I've never been there. It's a country I'd like to go to at some point if I get an opportunity. But what I would say is stay strong, South Korea. You are a leading democracy in the region, so it's vital that this is maintained.